The following broadcast is a document of fact. No actors or dramatizations are used. Some sequences were filmed with camera and microphone concealed. We found that this street corner in New York's Harlem is a marketplace.
Hey, Apple, you got some bags?
No, baby, if you say it's all right, I'll take your word. I thought it was your stuff.
I wanted to try this stuff because Leo told me it was out of this world, man.
Hey, Philip, get the bag. We'll be on the corner, man.
The customers on this corner are drug addicts. The commodity of this marketplace is the narcotic drug heroin.
Hey, Philip, where you going right here? Flip it to him, Felix. Just take your time. Take your time, that's all.
The heroin is packaged in small white bags. There are $3 bags and $5 bags.
Is it fat? Don't look like nobody putting you in no trick.
The sale or purchase of heroin is in violation of state and federal narcotics laws.
But, baby, you know how hot it is over here. You gotta be careful, baby.
What is happening on this street corner is part of an international multi-million-dollar-a-year business. How this business operates and why it can't be stopped is what the next hour is all about. Here now is CBS News correspondent Eric Severide.
Good evening. I'm not here to tell you the story that follows. I've had nothing to do with producing or writing it. I'm here on a point of personal privilege to tell you about the reporter who has put together what you're about to see. Jay McMullen is a Scotsman by ancestry and a very stubborn specimen of the breed. He takes an assignment and vanishes for months at a time. We no longer worry about that, not since he came back from Boston with the biography of a bookie joint, a broadcast that considerably shook up that venerable city and its police department. One Boston paper described McMullen as television's first crime reporter. He's back now after 20 months in 7 countries with a story of exactly how the drug called heroin finds its way from the opium fields of Asia Minor to the bloodstreams of American citizens on the streets of New York. Some of the people in this report speak anonymously. They are afraid for their lives. The facts speak for themselves and will be related to you now by my colleague, Jay McMullen.
The major market for heroin sold in the Western world is the United States. According to the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, there are more than 47,000 known narcotic addicts in this country, and experts believe there are thousands more who are unknown. Most of the known addicts are addicted to heroin. Here is heroin, this white powder. Addicts usually liquefy it and inject it into a vein. About 50% of the heroin addicts live in New York City, and an estimated 80% of the known addicts in New York City live here. They live in Spanish or colored Harlem. They live in tenements on dirty streets. And they buy heroin on street corners like this one at 118th Street and Madison Avenue. From a truck parked across the street, we observe the activity here.
Whose stuff is it? Is it any good?
Damn good.
Yeah?
Very good. It's the best thing out here. You know how things go out here. But it's the best.
Okay, we take it. You got one with you?
Yeah, I got one on me. Get your money ready, okay?
25, right?
Right.
Many of the people who linger on this corner are not here to buy or sell heroin. But even a little boy playing with his dog can see and hear what is going on.
Well, I get up about 3 or 4 times a day.
And these kind of 7 bags? Wow, you got an oil burner. You ain't got no habit, man. You got an oil burner. Wow. I remember when you was shooting 2 bags, man.
In the neighborhood, we questioned this boy. He is only 12 years old.
How do you know they're selling heroin on the corner?
I have seen people buy it and they have told me.
Have you ever seen school children buy heroin on that corner?
Yes.
How old would those children be?
My age and a little older.
Around 12 or a little older?
Yes.
Within a 2-block radius from this corner, there are 4 schools. Across the street, a nursery school. Behind this, Cooper Junior High School. To the right, also 1 block from the corner, PS 103, an elementary school. In back of this school, PS 79, another elementary school. William Saunders, Dean of Boys, Cooper Junior High School.
We have had, over the years, a number of youngsters who have been able to purchase heroin in the vicinity of the school, on the street corner, and we've also found that they did not inject the heroin, that they became what we call sniffers. They would take heroin, put it in the palm of their hands on a piece of paper, and put it up their nostrils and sniff it.
We found that most of the customers on this corner, children or adults, live in the neighborhood, but some do not. Well, now, you live quite a distance from the corner of 118th and Madison. Why do you go there to buy heroin? Can't you buy it in your own neighborhood?
Yeah, but the stuff would be better downtown than it is uptown.
By better, what do you mean?
Better quality of heroin.
Better quality? Stronger,
yeah.
How much heroin do you buy then each day?
$20 a day, $4 or $5 bags.
Each day you buy that?
Right.
How do you go about buying heroin on the corner?
Well, you go on a corner and you see who's around, if you know anyone, you know, and you ask him who's got the best stuff out there. And if he's the right guy, he'll lead you on to, you know, the best guy.
This man was a pusher on the corner until he was arrested and convicted.
Well, myself, I've sold as high as $3,000 in one day.
$3,000?
Yes.
How many pushers operate on the corner of 118th Street and Madison Avenue?
I would say on an average of 30 or 40 pushers a day.
30 to 40 a day?
Yes.
There are pushers out there working at various shifts?
There's activity goes on there 24 hours a day.
It
never stops.
The volume of business on this corner has been estimated by agents of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Bill Carasso was one of the investigating agents.
We had figured out that approximately $15,000 per day passes hands in the purchases of narcotics on this corner. That would come to $105,000 per week, or approximately $5.5 million a year in the purchase of heroin on this corner.
Where does the heroin sold on this corner come from? We asked Lawrence Fleischman, Deputy Commissioner, United States Bureau of Customs.
Well, like codeine and morphine, it comes from opium. This is raw gum opium. The raw gum opium is converted by a relatively simple laboratory process into what is known as morphine base. Now, this is morphine base. It's a white powder with a slight brownish tint. The morphine base is further converted by a rather complicated laboratory process into heroin, and this is heroin.
Is any heroin produced in this country?
No. The production of heroin is prohibited by law in the United States. So far as we know, there are no illicit laboratories producing heroin in the United States.
Well, there seems to be agreement among experts that New York is the major marketplace for heroin in the United States. Where is the most of the heroin sold in New York manufactured?
Well, we believe that most of it is manufactured in clandestine laboratories in southern France.
Now, where would these clandestine laboratories get the opium that they need to manufacture heroin?
The opium, for the most part, is grown legally in Turkey. A certain percentage of it is undoubtedly diverted from legal channels and put in to the illicit market.
Well, in other words, would you say that much of the heroin, then, that is sold in New York probably originates from opium grown in Turkey?
Yes, I would say a very high percentage of it.
The corner of 118th Street and Madison Avenue in New York City is separated by more than 5,000 miles from the streets of this city, Afyon, capital of the largest opium-producing province in Turkey. Afyon is the Turkish word for opium, and opium poppies grow in the center of town. We came here to trace the route of Turkish opium back to the street corner in New York City. Here is where the route begins, with the spring harvest and with the opium farmer. This is opium farmer Bey Halil. He said, "This opium field was sown in October. When the white petals fall from the opium poppy, it is time to harvest. Here is how the women extract the opium. That juice is opium. The opium juice hardens overnight. Then the opium is removed. In the house of Bey Halil, the opium was kneaded into a ball and wrapped with leaves. Through an interpreter, I asked Bey Halil, to whom do you sell your opium?
Size izah edeyim efendim. Şimdiye kadar yetiştirdik. Şimdi 60'ta kadar.
Bey Halil told us, before 1960, we farmers sold our goods to merchants in Afyon. These merchants were licensed by the government. They were supposed to sell to the government all the opium they collected from us. But it was found that the merchants were selling only part of the opium to the government. The rest they sold to the black market for much higher prices. But in 1960, the law was changed. Now we are not permitted to deal with the merchants. We are obliged to sell all our opium directly to the government.
Would he be happy if he could get more money for the opium that he sells to the government?
Efendim, o zaman tüccara satıyorduk.
If the government gave us more money, we would be pleased. However, even for more money, we would not sell our opium to outsiders. But the mayor of Bey Halil's village told our interpreter,
the mayor says that one of the men was fined last year by the government not delivering as much as opium he should. Is the man lives in this village. Some of the country people say that they know another man from the next village was caught last year selling opium to the black market and was put in jail for 5 years. The country people say that it will be very difficult for the government to stop the black market completely, and they don't want much publicity because they're afraid of government would stop planting opium.
the farmers don't want publicity about the black market because they know there is pressure on their government to cut back opium production for this reason. According to this United Nations report, the world's legitimate requirements for opium are declining, but the production of opium is increasing. The surplus of legally produced opium has more than doubled since 1960. Experts say that a cutback in the production of opium for the legal market would reduce leakage to the black market. But opium farmers oppose cutbacks, and in Turkey, where the farm bloc is politically powerful, no major cutback has been made. Business is business, and it is a fact that the more opium a farmer has to sell, the more he profits, whether he sells his opium to the legal market or to the black market. In the cafes of Afyon, we heard the black market discussed openly. These men told us some of the merchants formerly licensed by the government to buy opium from the farmers now operate the black market. 1 week after we arrived in Afyon, 230 pounds of opium and 2 revolvers were seized from these men, prominent merchants who lived in towns near Afyon. They were arrested by narcotics agents of the Istanbul police. We asked Hussein Chalar, chief of the Narcotics Bureau, how much raw opium do the Turkish police seize in the black market each year?
During the last 2 years, we have seized 2,100 pounds of opium and 40 pounds of morphine base.
Well, now, the farmer sells his opium to the government and gets $5 a pound for it. If he sells it to the merchant, he may get as high as $25 a pound. Is that true?
Yes, the merchant is usually the middleman because it is easy for him to contact to farmers.
To whom do the local merchants in the black market usually sell their opium?
Oh, usually they sell to other merchants who live in other parts of the country or Turkey, often near the border or big cities.
In Istanbul, government officials told us drug addiction is not a problem here. The problem is 5,000 miles away.
When I was on heroin, I became pregnant. The doctor told me that the dope go through the mother, go into the child. And that when the child was born, they would have to give him medication to bring it out. He would go through cold turkeys and sweats and different things, that same thing I would go through if I was, cutting down on it. And before they took him from me, they used to bring him to me. He'd eat, sometime he would, sometime he wouldn't. But he'd vomit, and he'd have cold sweats, he'd have chills, and then he'd have what's called slight fever and go through this cold turkey and aggravation and pains.
My biggest fear is to go out on the corner and get jumped on by the police and then slapped into a cold cell. And then cold turkey begins. You get hot and cold flashes, your stomach get terrific pains, your head bothers you, your bones, you feel like you just want all your bones to be crushed, you know. It's just that you're in a cell, you just can't do nothing but try to yell for help, but there's nobody there.
Well, you in good shape then. You don't have to worry, you done got all twice.
The sale of heroin on street corners in this country cannot be stopped, in part because the source is not stopped. Opium reaches the black market and does not remain in Turkey. The penalty for smuggling opium out of the country is death, but the traffic continues. From Turkish cities, the main black market route in opium led us eastward to the frontier that separates Turkey from Syria. This frontier is 830 kilometers long. Major El Koja, Chief of Criminal Investigation, Syrian Police.
The quantity of opium smuggled into Syria last year was between 4 and 5 tons, according to our estimate. We actually seized nearly 1 ton. This opium proved to be of Turkish origin. The opium is smuggled continuously into Syria through secondary roads. It is transported on tractors and other agricultural machinery. Mules and horses are also used. And very often, the opium is carried by camel caravans that follow desert track across the border. The penalty for smuggling opium across our border is from 4 years up to life in prison.
Are the Turkish police cooperating with you in attempts to reach the smugglers?
Absolutely not. The Turkish police do not cooperate with the Syrian police. Actually, some smugglers have confessed to us that they bribed Turkish police or soldiers to guide them through the minefields that the Turkish government has placed along the border.
At this prison, the Syrian police presented some of their evidence. 4 convicted smugglers.
This is Ahmed Muhammad Abdullah. He is Turkish. He is serving a life sentence for smuggling opium from Turkey to Syria.
Abdullah said, on behalf of a Turkish merchant, I smuggled 570 pounds of opium to a merchant in Syria. The opium was carried on pack mules. At the border, 2 men who were former engineers in the Turkish army were paid to guide me at night along a path through the Turkish minefields.
This is Muhammad Rashad, also Turkish, serving 10 years in jail for opium smuggling.
Muhammad Rashad claimed that he and a Turkish merchant had bribed Turkish police who permitted them to cross the border with a large quantity of opium. One of the prisoners we were not permitted to film was arrested for smuggling opium while employed as a narcotics agent of the Syrian police, an indication that opium smuggling results in corruption on the Syrian as well as on the Turkish side of the border. We asked Major El Koja, what happens to Turkish opium after it crosses the frontier?
إن مواد الأفيون تأتينا من تركيا عبر الحدود السورية التركية التي تبلغ مساحتها 830 كيلومتر.
Opium from Turkey, which crosses our frontier at various places, is brought to the city of Aleppo, which is 24 kilometers from the Turkish border. Aleppo city and district are known to be the principal storage center of Turkish opium. Because of its location near the Turkish border and its commercial relations with neighboring countries, Aleppo is a principal center of distribution to major smugglers.
Here is Hassan Usman, who is a Syrian, the biggest smuggler of opium. He is serving 10 years in jail.
Osman, an Aleppo merchant and landowner, said, I am innocent. It seems that some smugglers feared they were being followed by the police, so they threw their bags containing opium on my land. I found these bags. In the afternoon, the police came to my house. They were searching the area. They asked me if I saw anything. I said yes, and showed them the bags that I had taken to my house. I said somebody must have put them on my land, but I had nothing to do with it. In Aleppo, merchants negotiate illegal transactions in opium under the guise of conducting legitimate business. In this city, police have discovered concealed laboratories where raw opium is converted into morphine base.
This is Baha el-Din Muftah, a Syrian 22 years of age. He smuggled morphine base from Syria to Beirut, Lebanon.
Baha Mifta said, "In Aleppo, a merchant gave me 50 pounds of morphine base to smuggle into Lebanon. I concealed this morphine base in a car. I drove across the border and delivered the morphine base to a merchant in Beirut." At Beirut, capital of Lebanon, opium grown in Turkey, converted into morphine base in Syria, now reaches the sea. Colonel Abu Shakra, chief of Lebanon's Narcotics Bureau. Colonel Shakra confirmed that morphine base is being smuggled into Lebanon from Syria, but he said the Lebanese police had not been able to confiscate any of it en route. Beirut is a smuggler's paradise, according to Dr. Ahmed Zarwi, a psychiatrist and member of the Beirut Anti-Crime Association.
The Lebanese society believes in freedom to the extreme. And that freedom can hold well through political, social, religious, as well as business freedom. To the smugglers, this is a free business. Importing, exporting, selling it, making it, to them this is freedom.
Beirut is a free port. Goods in transit here are not subject to customs inspection. The Lebanese banks permit free trading in foreign currencies. And under Lebanese law, the banks cannot reveal to anyone the identity of depositors or give any information concerning their accounts. Dr. Zarwi.
Whenever you have secrecy of banking, you can have the secrecy of action. And certainly smuggling is the business that needs the most in secrecy of action.
Profits from smuggling and the traffic in narcotics may be reflected as part of the prosperity of this city. Beirut is 5,604 miles from the city of New York.
The money that my family needed for my children's clothes and things, that I would take that money and go out into the street and buy junk with it.
$23? Is that right? That's what I have for you, $23.
I just put $18 out of my pocket. I just now put in so many bricks. I just put $18 Can you understand what I mean, man?
The sale of heroin here cannot be stopped in part because the traffic in morphine base is not stopped in Beirut, Lebanon. Here, Turkish opium converted to morphine base is sold to customers from abroad. Some of the morphine base smuggled aboard ships in Beirut is transported to Italy, where it is converted into heroin. But we found that the main black market route leads to southern France, to the port of Marseille. This is Inspector Jacques Henry, Narcotics Bureau, Sûreté Nationale.
Anybody on the boat, whether it be a seaman, a passenger, or anybody else, can bring in morphine base. And the principal port of entry for France is Marseille.
Well, then you consider that France is a target for most of the morphine base that is produced in the Middle East.
That's what I think, because France, from a geographical point, is placed between the old continent and the new continent. There's the natural route from the east to the west.
But what about the connections between the French underworld in the Middle East? There was a certain French influence in the Middle East.
France has influence in the Middle East, and it may be that those connections come from that time.
What happens to the morphine base that is not intercepted once it gets into France?
When the morphine base comes into France, it's converted into heroin in clandestine laboratories that are situated mostly near the port of arrival, in the vicinity of Marseille. These kind of laboratories, you can find them at any kind of place. You can find them in a kitchen, you can find them in a cellar, even in an apartment.
Now, where is the main market for the heroin produced by these clandestine labs in France?
The main market for the clandestine traffic of drugs is the United States.
Do you believe that most of the heroin going into the east coast of the United States comes from these French heroin labs?
That's what we think.
In France, heroin addiction does not sap the economy or result in crime or degradation. Here, we were told,
it doesn't trouble our people because we have very few addicts in France.
The problem is here.
Well, I've prostituted and stole here and there.
Most of this money comes from all the thefts and everything, that crime that goes on in New York City.
You'd have to steal about $100 worth of merchandise to get $20 out of it.
For $100 a day, 7 days a week, that would be more than $36,000 a year. Is that correct?
It sounds fantastic, but we do it.
It's estimated that in the city of New York there are more than 25,000 addicts, and that they are responsible for not less than 25% of our total crimes. The great majority of crimes committed by them do pertain to crimes against property.
Let Peters give it to you right now, you understand?
The sale of heroin on a street corner in New York cannot be stopped in part because the production of heroin is not stopped in Marseille, France. We asked Inspector Jacques-Henri of the Sûreté Nationale, why can't the French police shut down the clandestine heroin laboratories?
The reason is that it doesn't take much equipment to convert morphine base into heroin. And this equipment can be washed away and put in a suitcase and taken someplace else in about half an hour.
And do you find that these labs then are constantly moving?
We think that when the chemist to which belong these labs thinks that the police has something on him or is going to have something on him, he just packs up and goes away someplace else.
Charles Saragusa recently retired as Deputy Commissioner of the United States Bureau of Narcotics. For 8 years, he was Bureau Supervisor in Europe.
The French police try as hard as they possibly can to close down the clandestine heroin laboratories in their country. They're faced with certain problems. Their staffing is insufficient. They have 15 men on this national narcotic squad. Their resources limited. There is no addiction problem in France of any consequence. On the other hand, you have a highly organized professional gangster group comprised by the Corsican gangsters who control heroin traffic. They're well entrenched in Marseille and Paris. They have many resources.
When you say they're very well entrenched, this means that they have lines out in many directions of support, of power?
They do. They have many contacts, and they have many spheres of influence throughout the country.
Now, how are arrangements made for smuggling French heroin into the United States?
And the mafia gangsters of organized crime control the heroin racket in the United States. They make arrangements for the procurement of this heroin through the Sicilian mafiosi in Italy. They, in turn, contact, negotiate, and obtain heroin from the Corsicans in Marseille and Paris, France.
Does the mafia then control the distribution of French heroin?
It very definitely does. It controls the market in the United States. It also controls the source, which is the French Corsican gang groups in Marseille and Paris.
Marseille, France is 499 miles from Palermo, Sicily. In Palermo and other Sicilian cities, the mafia is said to rule through a web of fear, extortion, and violence. According to Italian police, 500 persons have been murdered by the mafia since the end of World War II. Arrests have been made, but convictions are rare. Witnesses either will not talk or cannot talk. In Palermo on June 1st, 1963, 7 policemen died in the explosion of this automobile, believed to have been booby-trapped by mafiosi. In Rome, a parliamentary commission of the Chamber of Deputies now is investigating mafia activities, including the mafia's involvement in the business of heroin. Captain Angelo D'Andrea, Narcotics Bureau, the Finanza, Italy's Treasury Department Police.
In passato è stato accertato che l'eroina prodotta in Francia...
Captain D'Andrea told us Italian investigations disclose that the American underworld makes arrangements for the purchase of French heroin through its contacts in Italy, including American racketeers deported to this country. Until his death in 1962, an American deportee, Charles Lucky Luciano, was believed to be a boss of the Mafia's heroin operations. In Naples, Luciano received the ritualistic funeral of a Mafia Don. This American racketeer also was deported to Italy after being convicted on a narcotics charge. His story has been authenticated by law enforcement officials.
Based on your knowledge and experience, does the Mafia control the narcotics business in Italy?
Yes, it does.
Now, the syndicate you were associated with when you were in the United States, was this a Mafia syndicate?
Yes, it was.
When you arrived in Italy, who did you contact first?
I contacted some people that were already there before they deported. They were already established in Italy.
Now, did they take you to see anyone of importance?
They did. They took me down to Sicily, said, here's another one. Introduced me to the elders, known as the Mafia leaders.
These men call themselves leaders of the Mafia?
Yes, they do.
Could you describe them? What kinds of people are they?
Plain-looking, simple people. Large landowners.
The leaders would be large?
Yes. They have the highest respect in the community for these people, and the police and the population as a whole.
What did they say to you?
They said that they had all the power, all the say-so, and anything they could do for me, they would, that they had been word sent to them in advance before I got there.
Now, did you ever attend any meetings with these people?
I did.
Did the subject of narcotics ever come up at a meeting you attended?
This same meeting later on, the subject came around that word was from the United States. A lot of pressure was put on by the federal authorities, and there was a drain on the heroin, that the prices were going up. They were willing to pay anything. Now, these Mafia leaders should realize more money, more profit for narcotics.
Did you participate in the narcotics business in Italy?
I did.
Based on your experience, where is the major source of the heroin procured by the Italian underworld?
Corsica, Marseille, southern France.
How do you go about buying heroin from the Corsicans?
You go into northern Italy, city of Milan. There is quite a large Corsican colony there, and you make your contacts there. They, in turn, will contact Marseille and Corsica to fill your needs.
Based on your experience, where is the major market for the sale of heroin procured by the underworld in Italy?
United States.
Have you met in Italy with racketeers who came from the United States to purchase heroin?
Yes, I have.
Normally, do they bring their money with them for purchases of heroin?
They bring their money with them. It's preferred that it is paid in American money. They deposit this money, and then they would go back to the United States when they only got confirmation that the order would be filled in due time.
Is the heroin purchased from the Corsicans always sent to Italy, or may it be shipped directly from France to North America?
North America, mainly. If it's not shipped into Italy, it's shipped into North America.
An estimated 25% of the heroin shipped to the United States is manufactured in Italy, Communist China, or Mexico. But the bulk, 75%, comes from France. French heroin may be sent directly to the United States or smuggled into Canada or Mexico for transshipment to this country. The heroin may be concealed in cargo, in luggage, or on the person of any one of 158 million people who cross our borders each year. More than 80% of the heroin shipped to this country is not intercepted, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. Lawrence Fleischman, U.S. Bureau of Customs.
It's almost impossible to examine every piece of baggage and cargo, and certainly we do not examine the person of every individual coming into the United States by sea, by air, and across our borders.
The former commissioner of the United States Bureau of Narcotics, Mr. Harry Anslinger, once said that he didn't believe the flow of heroin to this country could be stopped through the combined efforts of the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. Would you agree with that?
It would certainly take a force almost as big as that to seal off our borders and make them airtight to prevent any heroin getting into the United States.
Who are the smugglers who bring French heroin into the United States?
They have almost any occupation you can name.
Syndicate courier Maurice Rosal, a Guatemalan diplomat. 114 pounds of French heroin were found in his suitcases. Simone Christman, airline stewardess. She concealed packets of French heroin in her undergarments. Jacques Angevin, French TV star. He concealed more than 96 pounds of French heroin in his car. We asked Lawrence Fleischman, do the heroin syndicates attempt to bribe customs officials?
Very rarely.
It has happened?
It has happened.
The sale of heroin on this New York street corner cannot be stopped in part because the importation of French heroin cannot be stopped. Some major importers of heroin are caught, but the conviction of a syndicate importer is a formidable task. Charles Saragusa, former Deputy Commissioner, Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
The top mafia smuggling groups in the United States insulate themselves. They never touch heroin. In many cases, they've never seen it. Their only role is to negotiate and to finance. The sole method that we have used in the United States to arrest these mafia heroin gangsters is through the development of conspiracy cases, which are very time-consuming and painstaking.
How large are the profits of the syndicate member who imports French heroin?
The mafia hoodlum in New York City pays $7,500 per kilogram, which is 2.2 pounds of heroin that is delivered to him in the United States. They sell at the first level of distribution for $15,000 to $20,000 per kilo.
In other words, they more than double their money right away.
Yes.
This man, who cannot be identified, bought heroin directly from importers. He was a wholesaler of heroin in Harlem. He tells his story in the present tense, but speaks of activities for which he was convicted in the past. You've told me that you have bought pure heroin in bulk from certain persons in New York City. Who were these persons?
Well, I buy mine from the Italians for $16,500. I buy 1 kilo.
Now, what do you do with this 1 kilo that you buy from the underworld?
After I get the kilo from the Italian, which is supposed to be pure heroin, I cut it in half. Then I put one half aside. The other half I cut and dilute it and makes a kilo out of that. That kilo that I dilute and cut, I take that and get my $16,000 back that I paid the Italians for the first kilo.
Now, what would you do with the second half?
The other half of the pure kilo, I keep that to sell to the ounce man. Now, if they want to buy pure, I charge them $750 for an ounce of pure heroin. If they want cut, which I cut from 1 to 6 times, I sell them an ounce of that for $250.
So what would be your profit then on that kilo of pure heroin?
On that 1 kilo of pure heroin, I make from $45,000 to $50,000.
In other words, you buy this for $16,000 pure from the Italian underworld, and you sell it for a profit of $45,000 just on this 1 kilo.
On 1 kilo of pure heroin, I make from $45,000 to $50,000.
What are your total profits each year, then?
Oh, from $500,000 and maybe sometime a little more.
You would make in a year $500,000 or more?
Yeah, sometime maybe more.
You must be a very wealthy man.
Well, I ain't got no squawk, no squawk at all.
Do you have any feelings of remorse about being in this business?
No, I have no feelings of conscience because, to me, it's a business. The same as the man with the liquor store. He sells his whiskey to alcoholics. To him, it's his business. I sell my drugs to drug addicts, which is my business. It's all a profit.
How do you feel about junkies?
I wouldn't spit on a junkie.
Does each wholesaler have his own territory?
Each wholesaler has his own territory. He is not allowed to go in no one else's territory without seeking for trouble.
Well, suppose he does violate the rules of the wholesalers.
If he violates the rules of the wholesalers, he will be called to a meeting. And in this meeting, he will be warned not to step out of line again. If he do, something drastic may happen to him.
Well, such as?
Well, you might find him around or floating around swimming in the wintertime in the water. No one can tell.
Do the ounce men that you mentioned before, do they have territories too?
They have their own districts, and they are a leader of their districts. They are next to me. I was a wholesaler, which we call the top man.
In other words, you sell, the ounce man is the next echelon down the line.
That's right. The ounce man is next to us.
Here is an ounce man, a distributor of heroin, in action. On this day, August 8, 1962, Pedro Martinez is headed for an appointment with a Harlem street pusher. Near the corner of 29th Street and 9th Avenue, Martinez is joined by the pusher, Pedro Torres. Torres produces money, and Martinez hands over a white paper bag. This bag later was proved to contain 1 ounce of heroin. We were not the only ones who saw what happened here. The man crossing the street now is an agent of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. 1 arrest, 1 bag of heroin intercepted. But the traffic in heroin continues.
All right. So that means you have to give me that. All right, look, all right. I want all that I can get, you understand? Well, I got told you. All the stuff I can get.
The total amount of heroin sold in this nation each year is unknown. But if each of 47,000 known addicts purchased only 1 $3 bag of heroin each day, the total sales would exceed $51 million a year. If each known addict purchased 7 bags a day, believed to be the average, the total yearly sales would exceed $371 million. On this street corner, the sale of heroin is open, even blatant. Why can't the New York police stop this? Deputy Chief Inspector Patrick J. McCormick, Narcotics Bureau, New York City Police Department. Inspector, we've observed considerable activity in the sale of heroin on the corner of 118th Street and Madison Avenue in Harlem. Is the fact that heroin is being sold on that corner news to the Narcotics Bureau of the New York City Police?
No, that's not news to us. And as a matter of fact, in the year 1962, we effected 32 arrests on Madison Avenue between 117th and 118th Streets.
Over how long a period of time has your Narcotics Bureau observed the sale of heroin and made arrests on the corner of 118th Street and Madison?
Over a period of several years.
In other words, this has been going on for quite some time.
Yes, it has.
Suppose you station police on that corner day and night. Would that stop the traffic in heroin?
Well, they would find means of getting it to the user.
They'd still be able to do it?
Yes.
The explanation of a convicted pusher.
They try very hard, the police do, but they don't have cooperation from the people, and which that is what they need.
Well, how do you mean?
Well, on an average, like, for people that have children and everything, and they know that there's people dealing right on their stoops and their halls, and instead of helping the police catch these people, they'll help the people to get away from the police.
We do find that some of the residents in that area will tip the seller off to the presence of policemen.
Among the customers on this corner, there are undercover agents of the Police Narcotics Bureau. They purchase heroin to obtain evidence against the pushers. Do the pushers know that their activities are no secret to the authorities?
Yes, I'm quite sure they do.
Aren't they worried that they will get arrested?
Well, they are worried, but they're so desperate for it until they just overlook it.
When a pusher is arrested in that area, is his place filled by somebody else?
Yes, another pusher is put in to take his place.
Well, they're recruited right from the area, and they're young kids that live in the area and know all about it.
And who are addicts themselves?
Yes, most of them are, and they want a chance to make money to supply their habit.
What percentage of the pushers that you arrest have previous records for the sale or possession of heroin?
Well, I would say upwards of 50%.
Well, that's a rather high percentage, I think you would agree. Does this mean that, in a sense, you are dealing with a revolving door situation here?
Yes, to a great extent, yes.
The average pusher, he goes right back because by having a drug record, it's very hard for him to get a job. So he goes right back to the same activities of pushing junk.
We don't believe that law enforcement is the solution for the complete elimination of the problem. We feel that the problem is also a medical and social responsibility.
There is a social responsibility in the poverty, the frustration, the rootlessness of the ghettos in the north, where the problem primarily is found. But whether he lives in a ghetto or not, the addict is among those who need help to withstand the pressures of life.
How many times have you been arrested and convicted as a result of your addiction?
Twice.
And what happened to you after you were convicted?
Well, the first time I got a suspended sentence. The second time I was sent to Lexington, Kentucky.
That's the narcotic hospital at Lexington?
Yes.
How soon after you were released from the Lexington hospital did you return to heroin?
6 months.
Why did you return? Why did you go back?
I was depressed. I couldn't get a job, you know. I don't blame it on nobody else but myself. But, it's just that, you know, you take the first fix and then it's up the ladder, like you said.
Do you really want to stop using heroin?
Yes.
Well, if that's so, why don't you commit yourself to a hospital? Why don't you?
So many reasons, I don't know. You really want to stop, but then you just really don't get yourself to go and volunteer into a hospital, you know.
The business of heroin continues because the need of the addict is overpowering and ever-present. Finally, the sale of heroin on this street corner in New York City cannot be stopped because the addict remains uncured. During the past hour, we have attempted to present certain facts concerning the business of heroin, how it operates, and why it cannot be stopped under present conditions. But what could be done to stop it? Some advocate the so-called British system, in which an addict is maintained on his habit by being legally supplied by a doctor. But the great majority of experts in the United States say that conditions in this country and in Britain are not analogous. And in Hong Kong, where unlike Britain, the problem of addiction is very serious, the British do not permit the legal dispensation of heroin. Critics of the plan believe that the maintenance dosage plan results in a maintenance of the problem, even though it may result in an elimination of the black market and smuggling. Clearly, the problem is to eliminate the demand for heroin by curing the addict. But how? Treatment of the addict more as a criminal than as a sick person has not solved the problem. In recent years, New York and California, states where the problem is particularly severe, have passed laws authorizing the hospitalization rather than imprisonment of addicts who commit minor crimes. In any case, it is a fact that in the United States there is no comprehensive, generally accepted program for the treatment of addicts. Even the scope of the problem remains unclear. The Attorney General of the United States, Robert Kennedy, speaking on the problem of addiction, said, "Not only do we not have a comprehensive program, we do not have sufficient, reliable information on which to base a program." The business of heroin continues to supply and feed upon a sickness of our society. In the words of the philosopher Thoreau, There are 1,000 striking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root.
CBS Reports, The Business of Heroin, was filmed and edited by the staff of CBS Reports under the supervision and control of CBS News.